Well, I think we will get started. First, I'd like to welcome everyone for coming today. My name is Terry, and on behalf of the board of the BKS Iyengar Yoga Association of Vancouver, thank you for joining us today for our presentation on the 4 pillars of practice. Okay, very thrilled to introduce all 4 of them for you today. And we will start on the West Coast. Okay, and we have Leslie Hogya coming in from Victoria. And then moving over to Vancouver, we have Linda Shevloff. And moving over 1 province, we come to Judi Mirus in Edmonton. And then going all the way east to Toronto, we have Sarah Bertucci. So thank you all for coming. And together this group brings 164 years of Iyengar yoga experience. So just let that sit in for a minute, 164 years. They have taught Iyengar yoga in 6 different communities. They have collectively made 37 trips to Rimi in Pune, India. All have volunteered to serve or are currently serving in both the regional and national Iyengar yoga associations, and we thank them for their creating of the foundation of those foundations. And under the new guidelines, each person is certified at the level 3. I, however, still think of them as senior teachers. And it's not because of the age, although I think for a couple that would also be applicable. But it's more because of their dedication and their experience on the subject of yoga that I think of them as senior teachers. So we appreciate your willingness to share your wisdom with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Leslie. Okay. Enjoy.
So good morning. Thank you to all the people in Vancouver who are behind the scenes for us today and organizing this. So I would like to have the lotus symbol up. Thank you. So this symbol is a beautiful symbol, the lotus flower, and it's sort of our guide for today. And even if you don't know what the words are, some of you may not have that much experience with learning these words. It doesn't matter, because what the whole image is important. If you look at the whole image and you see that this is a unified and beautiful image, and that each petal of the flower is just as important as every other petal. So each word, each concept in the yoga philosophy of Patanjali that we're studying from Mr. Iyengar's inspiration, that these words all are united and intertwine with each other. So we're looking at the yamas and niyamas, on which are the ethical precepts, the poses, the asana, the practices that go deeper with the breath control, withdrawing senses, concentration. So all these represent the 8 limbs of yoga, the ethical and foundational practices. They move inwards. But as you move inward, you still have to deal with everyday life. So you come back out and around to the ethics again. Outside the lotus are some words that these are the words we're going to be talking about today that Mr. Iyengar discussed in his book, the Yoga Sutras, on the 4 pillars of practice, sometimes they're called. So when we think about our practice, we have faced this difficult time. It's now 19 months since the pandemic began. And how has this time changed your practice? How have you adapted or not adapted? Have you adjusted? Have you stopped taking classes, or are you taking more classes because you're doing them virtually? And so these are the kinds of things what we want to talk about this morning. So I'd like to ask you, the people who are listening here, how has the pandemic changed your practice? What has changed for you? Did you lose your studio? Did you lose your class you like to take? Are you finding you're taking class with people that you've always heard about and now have that opportunity? What do you miss? If you didn't have a practice before the time of shutdown, have you deepened an idea of practice? Have you started practicing more? So this is what I'd like to ask all of you. So our participants, if any of you would like to answer or comment on how the pandemic's changed your practice. So if you want to raise your hand in that reaction box, let's see if somebody would like to comment.
Hi, yeah, sure. Well, I'm so lucky that I work at the Yoga Center. I teach at the Yoga Center in Victoria, and so I have access to all the good resources that we have here. But I'd say for sure that during the pandemic, my practice has really deepened a lot more pranayama, and I'm meditating, something I have done on and off all my life, but I'm doing that daily now, a couple times a day. And it's a very different, deeper, more internal. And I really enjoy that. And I don't think that's something I will lose the thread of when we go back to more of an open experience for asana and access to teaching.
Thank you, Wendy. Anyone else have a comment? Derek, can we have Derek?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go. I was going to observe that I had retired before the COVID event came. And in the journey from retirement to the offering of COVID, what I saw was that the egotism that circles around in working life is, in fact, a great disease. And so over the first couple of years, I start dropping that, really working at it and not to see it. And then I discovered something about the mind. And this came with the advent of COVID by coincidence or whatever. And that is that the mind, the accuracy of the thoughts and ideas that arise in mind are highly suspect. In fact, I opened up a little book and started putting down the little observations of the mind. And I went back after about, a little over a month and said, now, which of these actually were true? And I found that 70 to 80% of them were untrue. And I was untrue.
Oh,
They were not real. They were imaginations from what is occurring in the creation. People are saying what's going on, what's in the media, etc. And so what was seen was that the mind in its digestion process is unreliable. Unreliable. And what became real was the yoga and the practices, I would call them sort of spiritual practices without any particular denomination being relevant. The spiritual practices became enduring, and then the supplementation of that with yoga, with the Zoom classes and my own practice a couple of times during the week, or roughly every second day, really made a difference. And the sense here is are creating a different mind, a different body, and a different disposition. And if it took COVID to wake me up this little bit, hey, there are advantages.
Oh, that's really interesting, Derek, and certainly reflects a lot of things that Mr. Iyengar says about how our practice changes us from inside. Thank you so much. And I see Bev had her hand up. I see your Terry.
Thanks. Well, I was going to say the biggest thing that changed for me was being able to have access to Abhijata as a teacher. You know, we, the Canadian Association had Abhijata a couple of times. And, you know, for me, never having been to India, it felt so great to be able to, you know, be closer to the source. And, you know, then continuing to take classes on Zoom. I think I did have a yoga practice, but probably my pranayama practice deepened. And, you know, I used to do 2-hour classes, and I haven't done that for a long time, and very few in person. So it's definitely changed. But I feel like I still have a connection through Zoom. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Bev. That's interesting. You know, everyone's, you know, reflecting how it's making us go a little bit more inside. So thank you. Annette.
There we go. Ah, got it. The pandemic, I think it's the Zoom classes and the ability, I repeat what some of the other people said, that I'm actually getting more variety of teachers because now I do the Zoom, and I'm actually really enjoying teaching Zoom myself, or yoga on Zoom, though it's mostly my family, so I'm making lots of connections. But I probably won't ever go to Pune because I'm a really bad traveler and I always get sick. So it's really nice to be able to connect with the Pune teachers through Zoom, which I probably wouldn't have been able to do that. And I really enjoyed Abhijata's her teaching. I do miss sort of the collegialness and the practice together, but in some ways, the more I do the Zoom, the more I can kind of connect, even though we're in different places. We're doing the same thing at the same time, and it still feels like community. It's just the after stuff. You know, suddenly there's nothing there. It's not going to coffee or stuff like that. That's the part that changed during the pandemic. I think what's changed my practice mostly has been stuff that's really not related to the pandemic. I've had a couple of health issues. Well, those have been things that I've been working through, and I do have a direct relationship between feeling really stressed out and how much practice I'm doing. So I do notice that if I'm not being diligent with my practice, my shoulders are tight. I'm not as happy with myself, and I'm not happy with other people. So everybody likes me doing my practice, but also for me, the health issues and getting older, and I started yoga because of wanting to be healthy, and then I'm now not being able to do some of the stuff I thought I should be able to do. If I'd started when I was 20, I think I would be different. So I'm that, my type A personality pushing against my really just let it go and go with the flow. That's the sort of part that I've been working with right now. And I think a little bit more contemplation, maybe because of the pandemic, because I'm sort of more on my own when I'm doing my practice. My own personal practice has totally changed in the last 5 years. I went from sort of taking almost a prescriptive way of doing it to, well, today, what am I going to explore? And what is my body and mind kind of wanting to do today? It's not every day, mind you.
Well, thank you. And thank you. I just think that's really interesting what we've heard. And thank you all of you for sharing what you've gone through. It is some similar ideas that deeper, more quiet practice has become important for people. I'm going to just change gear here now, and I'm going to have Linda Shevloff take over, and she's going to talk about some of those ideas I mentioned right at the beginning with the lotus flower and the words outside the flower. So Linda.
So the word that I'm looking at this morning is Shraddha, which means faith. It's one of the pillars, one of the supports for a person on the path of yoga, making their way from the unreal to the real, making their way towards samadhi on the petals that we were looking at on the diagram. And the interesting thing about the word faith is that it is definitely a spiritual word. It's not usually applied, well, I guess it is sometimes, but in the true sense of the word, it's kind of a spiritual word. And if you look at some of the things Guruji has said about faith, one comment he makes is that, well, it's something that happens when someone already has had some kind of awakening of some kind. And then the faith is something that you have, that you believe or you trust in that moment or that understanding that has come along the way. And he differentiates the word faith from the word belief, from the word belief, that belief is a little bit more like an opinion, or belief is a little bit more something that has to do something. Can you hear me? The sound has just gone funny. Belief is more something that has to do with an intellectual side or with the mind. But faith is something maybe transcendent to that there is something that has come to a person that they know, and then they trust in that faith. They move through that faith. When I think about Mr. Iyengar and the Patanjali's path that he describes for us, one of the qualities of Guruji was he would be able to bring some ideas that maybe we can sometimes might think of as higher ideas or ideas that are beyond our understanding. He had the ability to bring them to us in a very practical way. So in asana, for example, we can work on our bodies, and we can work on these qualities. And he uses the word trust, and trust, of course, is a word that applies not only to the spiritual realm, but to how we behave in life, how we act, and how we can move forward. And I think, in the yoga community itself, like, we have to be able to trust each other to work together, or in our working lives, there has to be a kind of trust. And in family lives, we are supported by trust. And when there isn't trust, there can be a lot of stress, because then we're really on our own. And I think I can remember being in a class with Guruji at one point in India, and I had asked a question, and I had asked a question about something I had understood from elsewhere. One was a medical sort of question, and one was what some other teacher had said to me. And so I just asked that question, and he, in a way, I felt a little bit chastised, but I also felt he was trying to tell me, okay, just a minute now. At some point, you've got to decide what you are trusting. Like at the beginning, you might be experimenting with all kinds of things. You might be doing this kind of yoga and that kind of yoga. You might be listening to this voice and to that voice, but at a certain point, you've got to decide for yourself, okay, what is the path I'm going to go on here? And then if you've come to some kind of understanding, then to trust that and to go with it. So like even when we started studying to become Iyengar, we were Iyengar students, then studying to become Iyengar teachers, you kind of gather yourself and you trust in the path that you are that you are taking. I don't know if I'm making very much sense here. And also thinking about the word faith, the word Shraddha, how in life, I think we have little moments. I'm looking at myself as kind of a normal person, I think. We have little moments where sometimes something happens or some understanding comes, and it just comes, you might call it a transcendent moment, or a moment of like understanding, a flash. And to have faith in those things because they guide us forward, right? And I think that it's important for us to trust in our moments. And another concept that comes up in the Yoga Sutras, of course, is the obstacle doubt. That sometimes doubts, really, like if I think of, okay, the pillar that we need to support us is faith, well, maybe the opposite of that is doubt. And that obstacle doubt is something that gets in the way, that if we're always doubting, what happens with doubt. And I've experienced doubt myself, and I've faced doubt myself sometimes. And I just wonder, as a question for the group now, like, are there doubts that block you from moving forward? I think that's my question. I'm looking for little hands on my screen.
Well, some people that maybe didn't talk the first time, maybe this will stimulate some hands up.
I can talk a little bit more while people are thinking. I can remember I was a high school teacher for a lot of my life, and when I was sort of at the early in my career, I was so concerned about getting everything right, about remembering things, and feeling like if I didn't rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, somehow everything was going to break down. And I was overdoing it because I did not trust myself. And at some point I realized, if I continue like this, I'm going to burn out. I have to allow myself to trust my own understanding, and the words will just come out when the time is right. I don't need to rehearse this. And so that was, like, to me, it was an example of doubting myself that was blocking me, and I needed to have some trust in myself. And I think that is a thing. Now I see hands, hooray. Louis, let's hear from you.
Yeah, Linda, I doubt that I can add a major new idea to what you said. But what I'm curious about is the fragility of that relationship between doubt and faith, as though it always has to be recreated, relived, re-experienced. Like we just live in that conflict between doubt and faith. And rather than trying to eradicate one, to live in the other, it seems to help to just accept that is just a continuous fluctuation. A very practical example is practice itself, asana practice, pranayama practice, but specifically pranayama practice, which I find that, I've come closer to again during COVID. But it seems like throughout my yoga life, I always have to reintegrate pranayama in a new way into my life. And then it slips away. And then I have to bring it back. And how come, and students sometimes ask this question about asana practice too, how come when I experienced that the effect of pranayama so clearly in my life, from when I feel sad, upset, frustrated, doing some pranayama, how instantly it is helping to stabilize my nerves. How come I have to keep on going through this, making friends with that particular part of the practice on my mat?
Mm.
How come it doesn't just stick? You know, how come I have to go through this all the time? And I think rather than fighting the how come question is just to embrace it. It's something that doubt is in a way healthy, because it means I'm not going to become mechanical and just doing something out of dogma, out of I have to do this at 7 a.m. every day. But that the doubt actually helps me to try and explore the practice afresh.
Mhm. Mhm. That makes sense. Bridget, your hand is up too.
Well, I just wanted to confess that I'm a big doubter and that's been a huge obstacle for me. I mean, really in all areas of my life, like I can point to life paths that could have worked out differently if I had not been such a doubter and so ambivalent.
Mhm.
But you know, and with Iyengar yoga, I remember leaving my sort of my academic path and thinking, well, that's okay because this yoga thing has so much in it and I'll never be bored and I'll, you know, you could go forever on this. And then, you know, like a few years ago after my father died, I think it was mixed with grief, but also just having been doing the same thing for so long, I thought, oh, what is this giving me anyway? Like, it's not a living, it's not this, it's not that. And there were quite a few months where I just thought, oh, should have done something else. But I don't know, and I don't even know what brought me back, but somehow in my practice, I just started to realize, oh yeah, no, wait, this is right. This is good. So I don't know, no answers. Just wanted to share that I'm very familiar with doubt.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you. And Terry, you've got your hand up too.
Yeah, I would just a comment as well to add to it. That often when I'm reading something, there will be, and often with Iyengar's work, but you just know that it's true. There's just something inside me. I don't know how, I don't know why, but you just know with your whole being that that is the truth. And so I do use that in my own life, sometimes guiding me. It's do I feel, you know, doubt or limited because I have that on one side, or am I feeling? And somehow yoga has helped to maybe hear it or find out a more subtle layer to it. Because when I look at people now, their trusted sources are so askew. You know, they're just kind of trusting whoever's in front of them that is the truth, and they're not having that ability to discern. And I sort of feel that you know, that's the purpose of having doubt and having trust is to find that ability within yourself to discern the information and be able to take it and move forward in life.
Mhm.
You can't have just one and you can't have just the other. I think it is the balance of the two that helps us, as Lou was saying, you know, and Bridget, they help to propel you forward in an interesting way, the duality of it. Just kind of, that's it.
Lots of really deep thoughts because it's a deep topic. I'm going to now pass it on to the next word.
So I'm just coming back to now this graphic. We have a slightly different graphic. And if you didn't get to speak with Linda, hopefully the next chance will come up and you'll be able to speak again. So if we look at this, the lotus here again, and the words outside and out on the outside, now we've got the 4 pillars, and we've had the one Linda just talked about was faith. Such a clear ideas, and contrasting with doubt is, I think, very helpful. So I have just a little quote here that I found in Ashtadhyayi Yoga Mala, one of Guruji's collection of writings. Every individual strives to experience peace. Practice is not complete or thorough without faith and courage.
Mhm.
And this leads us right now to Sarah Bertucci, who's going to talk to us on the next pillar.
Thank you, Leslie. So the next pillar that I'm going to talk about is Virya, and Linda talked about Shraddha, which is faith. And Virya comes from faith. So in those petals, and we've seen how we go from one petal to another, and ultimately we're heading towards the center. We're heading towards the ultimate freedom that Guruji talks about in his book Light on Life, which is, I think I've read it probably 50 times, and and it's just so inspiring to keep going over and over. And we've talked about faith as well, and doubt. And Louis talked about how it's really that balance, and the whole point of achieving balance is that once we achieve it, we lose it, and then we have to regain it. And so all of these pillars have the same type of fluctuation, I guess you can say, where we tend to strive towards something, and once we get it, sometimes there's a complacency that arises that throws us off, and then we have to sort of find our way back. And so I just find that rather interesting about these different pillars. But the point is the practice, to continue to get up and dust ourselves off, and to get back on the horse, if you were, and continue. And so Virya does very much follow from Shraddha, which is faith, and Virya can be described as energy or vitality that arises from faith, but it actually means much, much more. And in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Guruji says that Virya is vigor, physical and moral strength, mental power, energy, and valor. And he says in Light on Yoga that Virya is having unflagging enthusiasm. Of course, we all know that he epitomized unflagging enthusiasm. I also looked at some other translations of the Yoga Sutras and found in The Science of Yoga that the author says that the word Virya cannot be translated by any one word in English, that it combines the connotation of energy, determination, and courage, all aspects of an indomitable will, which ultimately overcomes obstacles and forces its way to the desired goal. The author says that without this trait of character, it's not possible for any one of us to make the almost superhuman effort that's required to go through the yogic discipline through to the end, which of course is Samadhi. And it's interesting also to note that the root of Virya is Vira, which I'm sure you all know means hero. And so it's hero as in Virasana, which is hero pose. In Buddhism, right effort is Virya. The effort is to renounce, to let go. And when we speak of effort, this is not any ordinary effort, but heroic effort. It's a sort of effort like that of a mother whose child is in danger and who will sacrifice herself to save the child. When I think about the hero, I'm reminded of Joseph Campbell and his lectures about the hero's journey. And I was a big fan of Joseph Campbell back in the 80s, I guess it was, when he wrote and lectured on this subject. And he talked about comparative literature and mythology, which I was very, very interested in. And the hero's journey is an archetypal story of a hero who goes on a journey and is is victorious in a decisive crisis and comes home transformed. So we've heard a lot of these stories in different cultures and religions. And in our own yoga studies, of course, we're reminded of the Bhagavad Gita and Arjuna, who is the hero in this story. And he's on the battlefield, which is the setting in this allegory for the ethical and moral struggles of human life. When we think of the hero's journey and virya, this sutra also says to have courage to practice and to embark on the journey. It's the ability to keep going when things get difficult. It is the capacity to be fearless in the face of obstacles. And so, of course, this indeed is a virtue. Before the pandemic, many of us, including myself, were very happily trundling along in our ordinary lives. And most of us have a very clear memory of when the pandemic hit and changed the trajectory of our lives. Some considered this crisis to be a huge setback. And in my view, while of course I would have preferred not to have gone through this crisis, but given that we have no choice and we're in it, I feel that we should consider this as an opportunity to reflect on our own journey and to, reset, so to speak. We can use this time to break the spiritual complacency that we may not have even realized we've been in. During this time, I've reflected on my personal journey and have asked, many questions, some of which were, why has my practice been lacking in vitality, which of course is virya? Is my practice getting stale? Was I becoming too reliant on others, including my own teachers? Was I becoming overconfident? Or on the other hand, have I lost confidence? And so I wanted to ask you all just to reflect on your own personal journeys and your practice during this past year and a half when, the world's been thrown out of order, and consider, what has your practice been like? And has there been a time when you've been wanting to practice and have felt this complacency? And if you managed to find the courage to practice, what poses did you do that suddenly shifted your energy, where you felt revitalized and reinvigorated and wanted to continue practice? So I wonder if you might want to think about that and perhaps maybe consider, one or two poses that really shifted your energy or vitality, whatever word you want to use for virya. And if anyone would like to speak, I'd love to have you share your experience.
Tracy's raising her hand.
Oh, there she is. Tracy?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, the complacency, I really enjoyed what you said about that, and the obstacles, the opportunity of COVID. I think when we were first locked down, I was so grateful for yoga and my practice. And I liked the quiet. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, then it gets to a point where there was a lot of stress because we didn't know much about COVID. There was fear for going to the grocery store, sanitizing everything. So, that was an obstacle. There was kind of like this underlying nervous tension and mental stress. And so in the beginning, I was taking, all kinds of classes and immersing myself with international teachers, and it was great, and I was loving it. But, then as time goes on and you go to your own practice, when you're in one of those states where there's that obstacle of that kind of background mental stress and nervous tension, from seeing the news and hearing a new report and hearing Dr. Henry console families and who've lost loved ones, you know, it can get overwhelming and really heavy. So I'd say for me, just like my go-to, I guess when I'm feeling that kind of heaviness, but also the complacency of, I've got to fit in my practice today, which shifts me to obstacles I've faced these last 19 months as well. My go-to is Supta Baddha Konasana. And it's just, it's just magical for me. And then that leads me, you know, it goes into working with pranayama just on a very basic level with that pose, and then inspires me, gives me the courage to kind of go and continue my practice, maybe with some more invigorating poses. But also the last 2 years have seen me become a grandma times 4. Both my daughters have had 2 children each. So I'm getting immersed in that and being pulled in a lot of directions. And it's like, I've got this worry, when am I going to get in some practice? Because that just also re-energizes me. And again, Supta Baddha Konasana, I close the door, lock it, time I go in there because they've been visiting for long durations of time. They don't live here in Kelowna. So when they come for a long time. Forget babies and toddlers.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
A lot of busyness. So anyways, that's my, and also a handstand, which I do very modified. And I use in the wall and a bolster and a slant board. But also, and when I have the courage to do that, you know, it's great.
Thank you for sharing that, Tracy, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So Leslie,
I'm just showing Supta Baddha Konasana.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a good one. And really to be able to have a pose that you know will pull you in and transform you is so very helpful, and to know what they are. And so if you don't know what those go-to poses are, you might consider that next time you practice, and to really start to identify, you know, the each of the poses and what they have to offer you. And sometimes, as you pointed out, the handstand is very invigorating and will change your energy very quickly. Whereas, you know, the Supta Baddha Konasana leads, as you mentioned, more towards pranayama. So it's more introspective. So depending on what you're trying to, where you need to be next, will determine what pose you're going to do often. So just wonder if anyone else has anything to share with respect to either what we've talked about with Virya, or if you have a pose or two that you'd like to mention as your, you know, transformative pose, or at least, you know, pull you back into your practice pose.
Jane has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Jane? I don't see Jane. Oh, there she is. Hi, Jane.
Hi. I guess instead of a pose, I've been thinking a lot about linking between daily life and an asana practice, or reading the Yoga Sutras and an asana shape, things like that. And what Louis was mentioning a little bit about paksha, pratipaksha, and as a measuring process. And Mr. Iyengar said that pratipaksha, pratipaksha is the key, in many ways, the key to why yoga is not just a mechanical practice, and that is the key to why it actually works to revolutionize the being. That from outer, so that circle from outer yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and outer vigor, by the end of the process, as it is always goes from coarse to subtler perception of the body, so to speak, that and through oscillation, but finer and finer oscillations, that it becomes once you clear, then it is no longer yama because it's a practice, but the opposite. It's just, it actually comes naturally. Well, I mean, supposedly it can happen, right? And I just that when he says about merdu mad yadima tratwat, the division of the pupils into 3 types, and that they can be subdivided into 3 types. So you can have mild, mild. It means that at the even whatever level you're at, there's still an opposite that can be perceived. So there's always progress possible from coarser to finer. And I was thinking that there's like, if you take asana and you say there's right and there's left, there's forward and backward, there's heating and cooling, there's upward and downward, there's outer and inner. Then you think about pranayama and you think right and then left, heating and cooling. The air coming in is cool, the air coming out, and the heating sides and cool. You can see an example of the oscillations becoming finer as the circle is going from outer to inner on all those 8 limbs, it seems.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Jane. That was beautiful. And in fact, you point out that really yoga is for everyone, regardless of the level, because at whatever level you're at, you're able to challenge yourself and to be on that sort of point of, finding that balance where the effort is effortless, which, we all would love to get to in our practice. Leslie, I know you have your hand up, and Tracy Harvey has their hand up as well.
I'm going to interrupt though. Tracy, I hope we can have you in the next section, because we have our time. We have to move to the next person. So sorry, Tracy, we'll get you next time.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you, Leslie.
There's still opportunity. So my coming back to our lotus. So we've got the quote here that ties a couple of these ideas together, that faith needs to be firm and profound. Shraddha guides the intelligence, or faith guides the intelligence to verify the truth. This is how knowledge dawns. Vigor and courage follow each other and cultivate and right memory to move towards the real knowledge of wisdom. So we've got the 4 pillars along the side of our lotus: faith and courage, Shraddha and Virya we've talked about, and Judi Mirus is going to carry on with the next word. The next word, yeah.
Okay. The next word is memory. So much has come up through the questions and the answers and the description of the lotus. I just want to bring us back to the lotus again, because when Leslie sent us the diagram of the lotus, it covered so much in layers. We've got these words that kind of fit between the various petals, and they go around in the circle leading towards samadhi. And the thing that stands out is that each of these words intersects with the others. And they intersect with the lotus, they intersect with the yamas and niyamas, with all the 8 limbs of yoga. And by actually even studying that lotus and looking at these words, one comes to a sense of the clarity of these layers of yoga. And if we would just keep going back to that clarity over and over again, we would come to what amounts to samadhi. And that's, I think, what Leslie's going to talk about. But as I prepared for this and I thought about memory, all of you, or many of you, have talked about what the pandemic did for your practice. And it's been very varied. When the pandemic hit, it was about the time of Abhijata's workshop, the workshop she gave in just before or just after we did the memorial for Iyengar in Pune, and Leslie and I were there together. And one of the things she said in the course of the workshop was, well, she talked about mentoring. I'm getting far afield, but one of the things she said after the workshop, the first workshop she gave in Zoom, and saying that we can't, the Zoom is not the way to teach, but this is what we have right now. She made a comment that has stuck with me very much so, and that's memory. That's my memory of this. And it's accompanied me throughout the experience of the pandemic. And that her comment was so straightforward and so uncomplex in a way, but it was like a slap on the back of the head for me. And she said, it's high time that we adjust our relationships. Pretty simple to say that. And yet, all the way around in everything that's happened throughout COVID, it's been a thrust to re-examine our relationships, to our practice, to ourselves, to the people around us, to our society, and to everything we think. And so I want to have that at the back of your mind as I talk about memory, because it's also a call, which she said, to re-engage with the power of memory. One of my questions after I finish my talk is what would you think memory means? One of the things I've noticed throughout the pandemic is how many memoirs there are. More and more people are writing memoirs. Does memoir mean reviewing your life? In Guruji's thought, memoir means more. And he describes this very, very well in the 43rd Sutra and Samadhi Pada. I'm going to read some of that. Before I do that, I'll just say that memory is something that both holds us back, and yet without memory, we can't move forward. And a simple example is the study of asana and the study of pranayama. Perhaps more the study of asana as an introduction, that as we begin to know our bodies and we learn more and more of the configurations and the details of the configuration, each time we practice, we use the memory of those configurations and of those details to build an understanding of our body. But if we stay there, we get stuck. And that's kind of what I felt when the pandemic hit, is that I was stuck and I needed to move on and move into and move forwards and back. So the ultimate meaning of memory in the spiritual sense is mindfulness. Memory moves us towards mindfulness, and it moves us in stages towards mindfulness. What Leslie had us think about was the pillars of yoga. Without Shraddha, without Virya, memory would be shallow. Without moving forward with memory, the pratyahara and dharana would be almost impossible to grasp. Without those things, we wouldn't begin to get towards samadhi. So I'm going to read actually almost the whole commentary, almost all of Guruji's commentary from this sutra. The sutra is in Nirvitarka Samadhi, the difference between memory and intellectual illumination is disclosed. Memory is cleansed and consciousness shines without reflection. And I said something about his commentary was, when memory is completely cleansed and purified, mind too is purified. Both cease to function as distinct entities. That's hard for us to comprehend, but that's what we're leading towards. A no mind state is experienced and consciousness alone manifests itself. So I'm going to continue reading his commentary, and perhaps that will clear up some of the complicatedness, overcomplication of what I'm saying. Memory is the recollection of past thoughts and experiences. And this is what we do undergo all the time. Both Buddhism and Hinduism deal with being able to bridge the gap between subject and object. And that's what he's talking about. Its knowledge is reflected in knowledge. The knowledge of memory is reflected in knowledge. The sadhaka practitioner should be aware that memory has tremendous impact on intelligence. By perseverance in yoga practices and persistent self-discipline, new experiences surface. And I think one of the things COVID has done has turned our experiences and our understanding of our experiences upside down and our relationships. These new experiences, free from the memories of the past, are fresh, direct, and subjective. And this is what we get in asana. It's fresh, direct, and subjective. They expunge what is remembered in terms of our understanding of our body and our relationship with our body. Then memory ceases to function as a separate entity. It either merges with consciousness or it takes a back seat, giving prominence to new experiences and bringing clarity and intelligence. So as we get towards clarity and intelligence, we get closer to mindfulness. That's my interjection here. For the average person, memory is a past mind. For the enlightened man, memory is a present mind. As memory is purified, intelligence becomes illuminative and moves closer to the seer, losing its identity. And this is why on the lotus, memory stands between and bridges the gap between pratyahara and dharana. So we've moved from yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and dharana towards dhyana and samadhi. That's kind of the approach that I think this has all led us to. And I hope that anybody has, okay, when I used the word memory, what did some of you think we were talking about?
Just a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm David. So tricky. Memory's a trickster, right? I just wanted to maybe refer back to Derek and his example of thoughts and memories change as well, and what we remember, right, also changes. I was, as a young man, I remember reading a book called Pentimento. I don't know if it's an artist term. I don't know if anyone's ever read any Lillian Hellman, but she wrote a beautiful book. And Pentimento is when an artist paints over something that they've created, right? So they do a new version of it. And if we kind of correlate that between learning an asana and then perfecting or moving towards perfection of an asana, we're painting over our learnings of it through memory. But my only comment is that memory being the trickster, right? You remember something and you think, okay, this is the truth. This is the absolute truth because I was there, I remember it. And then 10 years later, somebody adds in one more fact and then your memory is shattered. So I think it's pretty fragile. That's all.
This is what the layer.
The layering of memory is what you said?
Things are paint over that layer. And we all have this layering. And as we get closer to being able to object and learn that object, which is what all the yoga is for, then we get mindfulness.
Whatever you were saying, we sort of lost. So I think I'll just carry on, and then if anyone else has a question, I'll carry on with that, and we can put the lotus back up, what Judi was talking about. All right. Well, guess what? I have my original drawing right here.
Nice.
Can you see? So this was my original drawing when we talked about doing this talked about the talk. The first thing I did was look at Mr. Iyengar's books and found this image. This was an image that he started working on in creating a mandala and an image that combines the concepts of the sutras. And so this is the base of the colorful one that you saw on the screen, which seems to have gone away. So luckily I still have this. So this is what we've been talking about today. So we had Shraddha, you can see is the yama and niyama we've been mentioning over and over again. These are the ethics. The ethics of yoga are the way we deal with others in the world. Yamas are things like non-harming, non-stealing. They always put it in that sort of negative thing, but because non-harming is bigger than being kind. Non-harming can come into, all kinds of things. And non-stealing. At first, you might think of, as a kid, you might steal some gum from the candy store, and you actually did maybe steal something. As an adult, the non-stealing then comes into maybe stealing ideas from somebody else, or when you're a college student, you might crimp all your essays off the internet. So that is another kind of stealing. So these are the principles that we live by as humans and to create our sane, hopefully calm society. So these principles are the basis for yoga. So living in ethics. And the second one, niyama, is about how we are also in our own selves, staying clean, staying healthy, staying in our practice, studying ourselves, understanding these kinds of concepts we're talking about today. So Shraddha is joining those two together in this diagram. Then, as Judi was saying, then the next two are asana and pranayama. So the physical practices of the poses and the physical aspect we need to sit and do our pranayama. And virya is the word joining those two. So Sarah talked about that joining of our energy, bringing our energy as we need it. And then smriti is memory, how we need our memory, or it either helps us, reminding us of what we can do, or holds us back by saying, oh, I could do that, so I don't need to work on it anymore. And all these are linked. They go around in a circle. And we come to the final concepts of the deeper practices of meditation and ultimate absorption. But we can't live in ultimate absorption. We can't live in samadhi and live in the world. Mr. Iyengar's book, Light on Life, we've been referring to, he says if you were in samadhi, you couldn't get on the right bus to go to work because you wouldn't care which bus you got on. So then we come back around in the circle. So I'm going to actually let Tracy, maybe you can come back to your question and we'll see how we can engage the group here. So Tracy, do you have something you'd like to say?
I don't have anything profound to say. We were talking about asanas that we were drawn to that gave us vitality. And so I just had some funny thoughts about that, my own personal experience, which actually connects to memory a little bit too. So first of all, Tracy Forsyth said that Supta Baddha Konasana was her place to go. And you want to talk about cellular memory, that is not a happy pose for me. So it was like, my immediate reaction was, oh, no, just because I have a hip issue. And so it's an off and on again pose, but I get the serenity of the pose. Supta Virasana, Setubandha Sarvangasanas have been traditionally my go-to sanctuaries, I'll say, pre-pandemic, and still are. And that's because of cellular memory, because I know what that will give me. And then just the point that I was going to make was more, if I'm looking for vitality right now, because I have some limitations, I've had some health challenges. I don't know if they're health, but physical challenges, that's the word I'm looking for. You know, vigorous back bends are challenging for me, but supported Dviparitta Dandasana in a chair and in various variations gives me that energy. And I know that from my memory. So that was where I was, that's all I was going to add to the previous conversation. The whole thing with memory and samadhi, where we're going with that, the memory is huge issues. One of the things that came up recently is on grief. And someone said that, you know, and we're talking about people that are, you know, in our 6th decade now, that we've experienced grief many times. And this woman is involved in hospice, and she said, all I can say is that every time you experience grief, it's another layer of Velcro, she said, on top of all the previous ones. And so that was just an interesting, I thought about that, and that made sense. You know, previous grief and now, and something that seems not as big. Why do you feel it so that way? And then from a yoga perspective, how do you step away from that and get all, you know, how do you get to that samadhi point where you're not living in that memory of grief? So those are some of the thoughts that came up as we were moving along the discussion here.
Thank you, Tracy. Anyone else have, from what Judi was talking about, anyone else have anything they want to say about memory? Or I know, Derek, I think you had a question a while back.
I wanted to observe that when I look and listen to what's said about faith, and in looking at that, to consider the business of doubt. And I want to use the example of marriage. When I got married, I thought I knew the woman in my life well. And as married life went on, I learned more and more and doubted more and more, and eventually got to a point where I concluded I knew nothing about my wife. She was a new person every day. And I thought, that's quite amazing. Is this real? Was my judgment bad? And then we were blessed with grandchildren. And when little Amelia was 2 and could show me how to use an iPad, it blew me away. And I watched her grow, and I thought I knew her, but I didn't, because when she was 5, she was a totally different human being. And now she's 7. And my God, another transformation. So what I've seen on my little journey, on the weird path I'm walking, is that the doubts, if embraced, if allowed, actually have the same effect on me, I think, as some birds I've observed. It seems to me that when birds are in doubt, they fly higher. And by flying higher with their doubt, they see much more. And they are restored in their faith. And my journey at many different levels has shown that the doubt and the faith are actually informants of each other. The next cycle, as the faith is restored, are quite different. And they cause this bird to fly higher again and be able to embrace the doubt rather than walk away from it or hide. And so the life journey is like the grandchild, or like the spouse, and like the yoga, and like what Mr. Iyengar talks about. It's a process of flying higher and transforming and embracing in you. And it's unending.
That's beautiful. All right, we just need to fly a little higher and we can see the vaster landscape. That's beautiful. Some beautiful examples. Thank you, Derek. Now, thank you. Tracy has said to everyone that she appreciated that as well. Tracy Forsyth. Now, Samadhi quotes. So we've talked about this word samadhi. It's a word that shows up on this chart. Stands alone in a way because it is also the definition. Samadhi and samadhi are both here because it's a state of transcendence. Meditation and samadhi come together here at these last two petals of the lotus flower. One time when I was practicing, preparing to teach something about these ideas, is I came across this idea that when you, a very practical idea, very simple concept. Let's say you're going to have a piece of toast and you want to put butter on the toast. The toast has to be hot. It has to come out of the toaster and it's hot. And you put the butter on the toast and the butter melts and you can no longer take the butter off the toast. So this simple idea is what happens when you're in meditation and go towards samadhi. The simple idea is that when you are going inward, you're thinking, you're calming your mind, you're trying to come to a state of deep quiet. If you go into samadhi, you don't actually know you're going into samadhi. You can't define it. You can't name it. You can't be in it and talk about it. So it's like trying to take the butter back off the melted butter back off the toast. It's it joins together. So the little quote I found is, samadhi has to come on its own. It is inexpressible. Nobody can say, I am in samadhi. Samadhi is an experience where the existence of I disappears. Samadhi cannot be explained. Once you try to explain it, then you're not able to separate it again. You can't separate it because it's a concept that's beyond the mind, which makes it difficult to talk about. So the four of us might have some ideas that we'll share. If any, we can put all four on the screen. All right, so thank all of you. I would just say that not right now. Thank all three of you for joining with me on this adventure today. And if you have some thought about how all these ideas have been linking in this talk, if you have anything you'd like to share with everybody, just throw that open to all of you.
When we're talking about samadhi, it's a really, really difficult subject, and we've skirted around all of those petals and talked about all the ways to approach it, but to actually speak of it is such a difficult thing. And so it's really hard, aside from quoting Guruji and others who are able to at least point us in the direction. I really quite honestly find myself without words. Which is
that's what I said.
It's a talk, so it's a little bit ironic, but I think what we have done is we've talked about the ways to approach this, and then when it comes, even at that point, we're unable to really speak of it. And if we were to speak of it, then we're probably not in samadhi. So it's a kind of a catch-22, or I don't know what you would call it.
That's right. Like I said, you get on, you wouldn't even care what bus you got on if you want to go somewhere. You'd just be out there somewhere. Linda, do you have anything?
Yeah, well, when I think about the pillars in particular, like the faith and the courage and the memory, I just find it very kind of heartening and supporting to think about those pillars as being the ways that we can move along the path toward this samadhi that is indefinable in some ways. And I really have enjoyed listening to the conversation about it. And I particularly loved the image of the melted butter, Leslie. Yeah. And I just thought, you know, how wonderful that is. But I think, you know, in our own lives, in my own life, those to remember things clearly is so as much, and to remember and to have faith in the things that I think I remember, even though, oh, that gentleman, that wonderful gentleman with the bird flying high, that talked about how so many things that he had written down and realized were false. But I mean, I guess that's part of the thing too, is to try to see things very clearly. And I think that, you know, if you ever studied with Mr. Iyengar, he would get into the little tiny details of bring your mind into your toenail kind of thing. And you could adjust, but you'd have to be watching so clearly. You'd have to watch so clearly your body. And what that would do, it would help us remember things. And we would begin to develop a kind of knowledge from that concentration. And I just see that in the vigor that through which he made us work, you know. And I think that in that practice of the asana, he was teaching us all these things. And so kind of meaningfully. And and he wanted us to remember, but we're remembering something. He was trying to make it so deep and so clear and so, in a sense, physical as well as spiritual, so you wouldn't forget. And I don't know, I just have a very strong memory of an image of Mr. Iyengar here as we have this conversation. I'm having a moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. That's true. I mean, my husband teases people. They say, now, if you really want to hear something about Iyengar yoga, they'll probably talk about the outer border of your little toe. Most people don't think about that too often in ordinary conversations. So I think we'll just wrap this up now. We've managed to come around to a full hour and a half almost. And again, thank you so much, Judi and Linda and Sarah. It's so fun to do this. If we could have just sat here and talked, the four of us, you know, we could have filled up the hour and a half, I'm sure. And I really appreciate everyone who contributed and raised their hand. And I always say that the value of digging into these concepts is so enriched by each person's contribution. So Louis talking about doubt, you know, being the opposite of faith and how we go back and forth. And Tracy, both of Tracy's talking about, you know, their practice, and just everyone. I can't name you all, but, you know, just really appreciate how that enriches all of our understanding. Mm-hmm. And Derek's wonderful image. We're all going to be looking at the birds now and remembering that when we go up,
go higher.
We go up a little bit higher, we can see more clearly. And so thank you, everyone. And thank you to the Vancouver Association for hosting us. And I have one last quote from Mr. Iyengar. This is from the very introduction. If you don't have this book, most of you do, I'm sure a lot of you are experienced students and teachers, but just as Sarah said, you could just keep reading it over and over and over again because it's so much in it, and it's written in simple English. It doesn't have a lot of Sanskrit in it, so it makes it very accessible. You can see where I keep marking things that I want to remember. So right in the very introduction, he says, yoga releases the creative potential of life. It does this by establishing a structure for self-realization. So we've talked about those 4 pillars today. So it's like a structure, and it's the lotus, the structures. Yoga does this by establishing a structure for self-realization, by showing how we can progress along the journey. The light that yoga sheds on life is something special. It is transformative. It does not just change the way we see things. It transforms the person who sees. It brings knowledge and elevates it to wisdom. So with that wonderful idea, I'd like to just close with a moment of silence, and I'll do the invocation in gratitude for Mr. Iyengar and his teachings. Beginning with 3 ohms, a universal sound of Om, uniting body, mind, and spirit. And take a breath. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya javaijakena yopa karotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi abahu purushakaram Shankha Chakrasidarinam Sahasra Shirsvam Shwetam Pranamami Patanjalim Harihi Om. Exhaling, bring your head forward just a moment. Being in that quiet state. Gita says to witness that quiet state. And as you witness in that quietness, going that deeper place inside. Namaste. Okay, thank you very much again, Terry and Tanya, Nancy in Vancouver. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here and being part of this talk.
Again, on behalf of the board, thank you, Leslie, Judi, Sarah, Linda, for your words today. And hopefully the presentation can help us take some concepts in our head and put them into practice in life. That's what yoga is for. Namaste.